Hi, readers. So let's pick up with our session work today and our reading workshop. We started with yesterday a new bend of our session where we started to really look at, instead of just looking at the character, we started to look at the setting and how the setting influences our characters. And we thought about what kind of a place it is and what's the mood of the place. We also started our story looking at Will now that he's in middle school, called The Fight. And we started to track the setting and how it seemed to influence our characters in the story. Today, we're going to add on to that work. I'm going to teach you to notice when you're in the setting, not just the where it is or the mood, but the specific language that the author uses to invoke an emotion or to paint a picture in your mind. So we're going to be doing that work today, and we're going to use text evidence. Remember, text evidence is so important. This is when you're going into the story and pulling out a piece of the story to back up what you're thinking. This is such a life skill. Y'all have to know how to do this. So repeat after me. Yes, I'm talking to you. Repeat after me. I will learn how to use text evidence to back up my thinking. Good job. Okay, so we're going to be using text evidence and looking at the setting today. And I'm going to read a little bit more and find out what happens with Will and kind of his confrontation that he's in. So we're going to look at subtle details that the authors added and think not just the literal meaning, but figurative meaning of the language that's used by the author in this scene. So yesterday we started to read where Will and Mike were in gym class and they were playing basketball and it was getting kind of rough. So we're going to pick up after there. As I'm reading, I want you to think where the story is going. So we're at school right now. Where is it? That's the setting. How is the author writing that to create an emotion? So what is it like there and how is it written? You're going to be doing this work on your own in a little bit. So let's do it together over Will. So I'm going to go full screen here. Give me just 1 second. Things probably would have been taken a peaceful turn if I hadn't walked home with Kevin Cox after school and told him that the next time Mike and I played basketball, I was really going to throw some elbows. And if Mike, didn't like it, I would fight him anytime, anywhere. I don't know why I said this. Perhaps I was thinking of the Mike I had known a year before. Perhaps I was thinking of the thin, gullible, good-natured Mike who had since grown 4 inches, gained 15 pounds, and became a humorless and menacing as a drill sergeant. Kevin looked at me doubtfully. Do you really think you can take him? He asked me. Since Kevin had always been one of my most loyal and servile followers, I was astonished by his doubt in my physical powerness. I know I can take him, I said. He's 3 inches taller than you, Kevin said. So? He's really strong. I'm really strong. Kevin shrugged. Okay, he said, but I think Mike could take you. Now it was my turn to shrug. It was also my turn to lay a condescending hand upon Kevin's shoulder and leave him to ponder his absurd and treacherous notions. The next day in school, everything proceeded as usual. I listened to the teachers, took notes, fell asleep, made a few uncalled for remarks, and gazed at Denise Young. During lunch, I was sitting with a table of friends, talking and listening in my usual superior way, when I heard Mike Ditcher say, "Hey, buddy." Somehow, I knew that he meant me. Somehow, I also knew that all kinds of jigs were up and that something monumentous was going to happen. I turned to look at him. "I hear you want to fight me," he said. "That's right," I said. "I'll meet you after school." "I'll be there." Then he walked away, and I discovered two interesting things about myself. The first was that the idea of fighting terrified me. And the second was that in moments of extreme fear, my body produced ice cold sweat. Someone said something to me and I smiled and nodded. Someone else said something to me and I smiled and nodded to that too. Perhaps they were giving me advice. Perhaps they were telling me to stay low and lead with my left. I stood up without really knowing I was standing up and walked from the cafeteria to the playground. I had never felt so lonely or so frightened in my life. Somehow I had taken a wrong turn and wound up on the wrong day, in the wrong body, with the wrong future. Somehow, in 3 hours, I was going to be in a real fight with a real fist, and there was no way out of it. Wow. So the author's done a really good job again at giving us kind of some suspense in this moment. And we're looking at where Will is, which is at school, and how the setting is changing and how the author's use of language is invoking an emotion or a visual image for us. So just thinking about that cafeteria where Will was sitting with his friends, you know, we reread specific parts and look for the specific language that's used. Like it says, during lunch, I was sitting with a table full of friends, talking and listening in my usual superior way. So right here, you know, Will's kind of in that I'm better than nobody else mood, and he's usual, and this is kind of the vibe in the cafeteria. But then when the confrontation starts between him and Mike, he's in the cafeteria and still feels different by the time that conversation is over. It's like, you know, he said something about feeling alone and walking kind of alone. When he stood up, I stood up without knowing I was standing up and walked from the cafeteria. I've never felt so lonely or frightened in my life. So we go back and look for the specific language: lonely, frightened. Those are strong emotional words. We look at what insights it gives us to the character. So how Will, you know, he wants to be bad, you know, and think he's all that. But when it comes down to it, now we can see Will's actually terrified. He doesn't want to get in a fight, and he has not been in a fight. And this guy's bigger than him, and the odds are against him. And so the way the author did that was they built that strong emotion and gave us those images. So today for your work, you're going to be attentive to the language the author uses. Look for symbolism and figurative language and kind of that art that the author uses when they're painting these pictures. You're going to go back in the story and find two examples of text evidence that captured the setting and the way the author wrote the setting that created an emotion. If there's not emotion there, then don't pick that setting. Pick places in your story that are important or there's a strong emotion that happens there. So it might not be school for you. It might be a forest. It might be in the car. It might be in another planet, depending on what you're reading. You're going to find two examples of text evidence and tell me what the author really meant when they wrote those words. So notice figurative language and descriptive language in your book. Find those two examples and submit them on Canvas. Off you go, readers.